This is Victoria Beal with the LTAP Center. I want to welcome you to part 2 of Highway Plan Reading. We have Brett Shearer from the ODOT Office of Real Estate who will continue being your instructor for this course. So a couple housekeeping items and then I'll turn things over to Brett. First off, we'll be accepting questions again today via the question box. So if you have a second, just like on Tuesday, please find that box and drop me a hi or hello so I know that you know where that's at. And thank you to those who've already put that in there. I appreciate it. Secondly, in the handouts panel, we do have a copy of the slides for today. So you can download those. If for some reason the download function's not working on your computer, don't worry. I'll be sending out a follow-up email just like I did on Tuesday with hopefully a link to the recording if that works successfully, but definitely a link to the slides from today's presentation. Also wanted to mention that I put some other flyers in there for upcoming webinars later this month in case you're interested, ADA and temporary traffic control, gravel roads, the ins and outs of the OH1. If you've ever wanted to know every piece of data you could mine for safety and looking at the crashes on your roadways, that's definitely your webinar. So those items are in the handout panel if you're interested. So with that, Brett, are you ready?
I'm ready. Can you hear me okay?
You can. It's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Victoria. Appreciate it. Well, welcome back, everybody. My understanding is pretty much everybody that's in here today was on Tuesday. If you weren't, well, again, welcome to the Highway Plan Reading. Today, we're going to be covering right-of-way plans. Again, my name is Brett Shearer from the Office of Real Estate, and we're just gonna, since most of you have been here Tuesday, we're gonna dive right into this. I'm not gonna go into my background. Hopefully, all of you know who I am now. With that, so now what we're going to do is right-of-way plans. So first I want to explain that right-of-way plans are a subset or a part of construction plans. Anytime ODOT designs a project or is doing a project, if we acquire or need to acquire any right-of-way, there will be a set of right-of-way plans that will be basically a subset or a part 2 of the plans. We do have projects that are just construction plans because we don't have to acquire right-of-way, such as a resurfacing job and things of that nature. Anything that we can do within our own existing right-of-way, we generally won't have a set of right-of-way plans. So right-of-way plans, again, only pertain if we're going to acquire real estate from the abutting property owner. So with that, the first sheet, very, very similar to the construction title sheet. It's just, so there's no confusion, we call it the right-of-way legend sheet. And we came up with the name legend because there's actually a lot of different legends, and I'll go over all of those, that information that pertains throughout the sets of plans. So this slide kind of shows you the things we're going to go over. Some of them we're going to go over very quick because some of it's much of a review, just minor changes. So at the very top, as you can see on the legend sheet, it says right-of-way legend sheet. And then you have your county route and your section. We also have a title block on the right-of-way plan sheets, just like we did in the construction plans on the right-hand side. There are 2 things that are different. All of these things I covered on Tuesday, the page sheet numbering and stuff, the county route and the section, but we now have what's called the right-of-way sheet numbering. So as you can see, right above the overall sheet numbering, we have 1 of 12. So there are 12 right-of-way sheets. This is sheet 1 of the right-of-way plans. And then of course it's sheet 90 of the overall plan set. So, and then the other thing we do in right-of-way plans is we have the right-of-way. There's 2 people that are required to be pre-qualified to, actually the firm is pre-qualified, but the design firm must have 2 individuals, one being a designer and one being a reviewer. The reviewer must be a licensed surveyor. And with that, I always kind of find it kind of funny. Most people call this right-of-way engineering, but in reality, it's not an engineer that puts the plans together. It could be, but what is required is a surveyor. A licensed surveyor must review the plans and be involved in preparing them because we're dealing with property lines. So we have a designer and a reviewer that gets put on the title block. Everything else, same as what you saw in the construction plans. And the other thing that happens in right-of-way plans is we not only talk about the county we talk about obviously the township, Clear Creek, which is a political township, but oftentimes you will see, depending on where you're at in the state, we break it down into what we call the political subdivisions, or I'm sorry, the surveying subdivisions, or public land surveys is what it's really called. So different parts of the state have different land survey types. There's a Virginia Military District, for example. The area we're dealing with is sectionalized land with townships and ranges. And the reason I bring this up is because here it says section 35 and 36. It's in town 4 east, range 4 north. Really only applies to everything, but it applies to surveyors. But I want you to understand that that's included. And don't be confused. There's a political township and then there's a survey township. In some areas of the state of Ohio, a political township, the boundaries can change and have changed over time. Original land public survey townships do not. They're infinite, they're forever, the way they've been surveyed and their location. So with that, we also have a location map. The only thing I really want to point out here is we identify it as begin acquisition, end acquisition. Really everything else is pretty much the same. And instead of being stationing, we actually, on the right-of-way plans, we show the straight line mileage. So the SLM. So the beginning of the acquisition begins at straight line mileage 20.84 and ends at 21.249. That's the difference in the construction plans. It talks about stationing there. We also have what's called a structure key. That identifies the different types of structures throughout the project. We have 3 different types. We have a residential, so a residential home, a commercial building, and an outbuilding. An outbuilding would be a barn or a detached garage, for example. So kind of, if you see these symbols throughout the plans, that's what they're referencing. We also have a legend on the types of takes that we acquire for this project. So specifically on this project, we're acquiring a warranty deed, standard highway easement, slope easement, a channel easement, a property right, and a temporary easement. We'll cover some of these. We don't have the time to go over each and every one of them in detail, but we will cover some of them throughout the class today. We also have what's called a conventional symbols that is shown on our legend sheet for the right-of-way plans. Now this does not obviously illustrate all the different line styles and all the different symbols that you might encounter in the entire set of plans. What it does show you is the more predominant ones that you would see in most every set of plans. The things that we tend to, or as a right-of-way designer, what we have to update is this section right here. The designer should be updating it to the right-of-way line styles that are applicable to the set of plans that are involved. The reason we do this is the right-of-way plans are the one thing that are historical, meaning we're looking at plans that were right-of-way plans that were developed back in the 50s and the 60s, and 40, 50 years from now, they'll be potentially using these right-of-way plans. Whereas on the construction side of things, once the project's built, we generally on the engineering side don't go back, or we use very minimal information from the old construction plans, where the right-of-way plans are historical. So we want to make sure that we have good documentation of what types of line styles we used on this plans, because historically things have changed. In fact, to give you an example, channel easement is CH. As you can see right here, this is the channels, the line styles of CH. If you go back into the 50s and the 60s, they used, there was an X they used for channel easement at one time, and they also used some other letter suffixes, but X was the more predominant one. But since about the mid-90s, we've been using channel easement. And then of course, tree line, I just put that on here because there are some tree lines that we're going to be looking at later on, or may talk about if we have time. In the middle is your sheet index, and real quickly, we're obviously talking about the legend sheet. We will not talk about the centerline plat sheet today. We'll talk very briefly on the property map, and the majority of our time will be spent on the summary sheet, and then we'll spend a significant time on the right-of-way detail sheet, but most of it's going to be spent on the right-of-way summary. We will talk about briefly about the topo and boundary, but I'm not going to cover those sheets. In the upper right-hand corner, just like in the construction plans, we have the project description. This one did not have it, but what I want to point out is we do require the right-of-way designer now to include a paragraph underneath the description that says include a reference to the appropriate center line. I've got that highlighted in yellow here. Center line for which the existing and proposed right-of-way lines are referenced. Later on, we'll talk about how we do station and offsets for the parcel takes, what we're acquiring. And if we do have multiple center lines, whether being a proposed center line of right-of-way and a proposed center line of construction, and that they're different, we want to make sure that we're identifying what station and offsets they're referencing. So we always make sure that there's a line in the project description on the right-of-way legend sheet that identifies that. Then we also have on the legend sheet, we have a paragraph that talks about who prepared the plans, who the designer was, who the reviewer was, who did a field review, when that field review was done, and then an ownership update. But what is most important is this plan completion date. We'll talk more about this when we get to the summary of additional right-of-way sheet and the revision block. But this is the date that the designer has completed the plans and sent it or given it to the district real estate administrator to go ahead and begin acquisition. So this date becomes very important when it becomes the negotiations and revisions to the plans. So it's noted here, but it also is noted in the revision blocks, and we'll cover that in a little while. So that concludes the legend sheet. Again, I didn't cover everything, I just hit the highlights. Now we're going to jump into property map. And again, we won't spend a ton of time here, but I wanted to make sure you understood how a property map works. Really, before I get into ownerships, a property map, think of it as a snapshot of the auditor's tax map. That's really what it is. It's just a snapshot of the project corridor that includes all the properties that will be impacted as part or potentially impacted as part of the project. But before I get into the plan sheet itself, I must just quickly review how we number ownerships. You guys can read this. I'm not going to go through each line, but an ownership is defined as an area of all contiguous lands having a common owner. Names should be identical. We require the designer that the names must be identical. So for example, if it's James J. Smith and the abutting property owner is J. Smith without the initials, they as the designer will identify them as two different property owners in the beginning. Now later on it might be combined, but because they're not identical, our designers are not title experts, they're not title agents, they didn't do a title report, they basically are pulling the information from the auditor's tax maps and the current deeds. So if the names are not identical, they will be identified as two different property owners and assigned a different number. What does contiguous mean? To be clear, contiguous, being in physical contact with, adjacent, abutting, touching, along, all or part of any side of the property. So that's what contiguous, what we define as contiguous. So there's other things in here. All ownerships within a project limits are numbered from the beginning of the project to the end. Numbers increase in the direction of the increasing station. The numbers should bounce from side to side. We don't require that there be odd or even on either side or anything like that. The rest of this, read through at your leisure. Again, don't have enough time to go into detail on this, but I do want to, here's a property map. As you can see, the scale on which it is put in, oops, sorry about that. The scale at which it is put is kind of like being in an airplane about 5,000 or 10,000 feet above the project corridor. So you're not getting a lot of detail here. The idea is of the property map is to show all the properties, obviously, that will be impacted in their entirety or best possible, along with the relationship of the existing corridor to the proposed corridor. And that's the broad of it, and the property owners themselves and numbering them and their names. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so you can actually see. So we've identified as shown parcel 1, Warren County. So the underlying fee of our roadway is Warren County, and we've identified as property owner 1. Country Time, which is a developer, they own parcel number 3, which is actually right here's 3, there's the boundary of 3. And then of course we have property owner 11, which does have multiple auditors permanent parcel numbers. These in Ohio are tax identification numbers. And so parcel number or owner number 11 owns two different parcels that are combined, they're contiguous. Now this little line here, I'm not going to get into the depth, but what that is we call that a break line. And if I jump back here, you'll see that there's an additional property line that is attached to parcel 11. Basically what that means is it's not drawn to scale. It would actually go off the sheet if we were to draw it to scale. So that's what that means, that break line. I'm going to zoom in here because I want to talk about the property lines and how ODOT identifies property lines. They're actually identified as a line with a symbol on them, PL. So this is a perfect example. It's a subdivision right here. So what I've done is all the PLs, I've highlighted those. They're along these property lines and they identify what the property lines are. This would be one ownership. Now we're not numbering these lots because they're not being impacted by the project. Only parcel are number 7 and then number 3, which is down here. I don't have it on there, but you can see how we've at least identified them on the property map. We didn't number them. And then here's the abutting property owner. So again, these PLs represent the property line. And then as for buildings, drives, and structures, remember that structure key that I showed on the legend sheet, residential, commercial, and outbuildings. Well, this happens to be all the buildings, so it would appear from the structure key that they're all residential properties. I will tell you this project was built a long time ago. We found out afterward that this was actually an outbuilding, so was this and this one. The reason they are shown, and this is, I bring this up to make sure that everybody understands, the designer did the best they could. This driveway right here, there was a gate across it. It said private property. The driveway went down through a valley and then up a hill and came around. This was all wooded area. We could only see these from an aerial photography, barely see them, to be quite honest with you. So they all got identified from the design spec aspect as a residential because we didn't know. We didn't meet with the property owner. We sent them letters, didn't receive any information back. So you can't always trust these per se because it's the best information we have at the time. But the idea is we should have 90% of the time we have these right. In this case, we had them wrong, but gives you an idea what we're looking for when we talk about structure key with the structure key. Oops, sorry, I forgot one thing. This little symbol that looks like a Zorro Z, if anybody's familiar with the Zorro, is a land hook. This represents a land hook. That means these were different auditors permanent parcel numbers, and the current property owner owns all 3 of these auditors permanent parcel numbers, all one ownership. That concludes the property map. Now we're going to jump into well, let me stop right here. Victoria, do you have any specific questions that you've received from the group?
We do not up to this point.
Awesome. Okay.
Thanks.
Just I'd stop and ask because now we're going to get into the summary sheet where the bulk of what we're going to talk about. So, and then we'll have a knowledge check after that. So the summary of additional right-of-way. So these are the things I'm going to cover. I hope you have your thinking caps on this morning. So first, we're going to really hone in the beginning of this on parcel number 8. And I've highlighted, this is from the property map, all of parcel 8 in gray with the little red around it. So you can see there's an ownership hook here. So they own this one, but it doesn't have a separate auditor's permanent parcel number. These 2 lots were combined into the auditor's permanent parcel number that ends with 006. This auditor's permanent parcel number is up here. So this is all property 8, property owner 8. It's all contiguous, but there are 2 different auditor's permanent parcel numbers. So we're going to focus on the summary sheet, which is on sheet 93. For those of you that weren't on maybe Monday or on Tuesday, at the top, I identify which sheet numbers we're on. So if you happen to have the plans in front of you, you can take a look at them. But we're going to zoom in. You don't have to, just follow along with the slides. Parcel number 8, I'm going to focus on the first column in the summary sheet, is called the parcel number column. What that column includes is obviously the parcel number, because we number every ownership, and then the type of take. Combined, they are called the parcel number. So it's the ownership number along with the type of take that we're acquiring from the property owner is in the parcel number column. So this is parcel number 8. It's Kenneth and Imelda Dams, and we're acquiring a warranty deed or a fee parcel from them. We are also acquiring a channel easement, and we are acquiring a temporary easement. Oops, come on. Yeah. And the next column over is the owner's column, which is, well, obviously the name identical to what's on the deed. So Kenneth C. and M. Imelda Dams. The next column is the sheet number column. What this references is the right-of-way detail sheets that you will find parcels 8WD, 8CH, and 8T. You will find them on right-of-way detail sheets 7 and 8. The next column over is the owner's record column. And in this county, at this time, I specify that, it was official record. That's what official OR, and then it was a page number. So the official record was 473, the page was 25, and then for auditor's permanent parcel number 004, it was official record 1012 or 1012 and page 551. I say that because this gets modified every county, and within a county timeline, you could have deed and volume, deed book and volume, you could have official record, you could have microfilm. There's a host of different combinations. Ultimately, it's how did this owner obtain title to that property? That's the information that goes in these two columns. It may look a little different depending on the project. The next column is the auditor or tax ID, auditor's permanent parcel number or tax identification. This parcel, as we talked about, has two different tax identifications. One ends in 006 and one that ends in 004. The next column is what we call the record area column. That's the record area for each individual auditor's permanent parcel number. So the one that ends in 006 has 8.528 acres, and the one ending in 004 has 1.292, for a total of 9.82 acres for the dams property, or parcel number 8. Now, I'm going to scoot over on the summary sheet, so I'll move over to the right. But I will I'll keep at least the parcel number column, the auditor's permanent parcel, as well as the record area. And what I want to make abundantly clear here, this record area is reported by the county auditors. It's the record area per the tax map office or the auditor's office. It's what they're taxed on. That may not exactly match the legal description or the current deed that which they obtained the property from. The reason we do this is obviously tax purposes, but also usually this number will reflect any out sales. There may have been a breakout, a sale that happened, a split since they obtained the property that will pull that acreage out or that area out of the record area. So that's just want to make sure I'm abundantly clear on that. Then I want to refresh just to everybody. This again is parcel number 8, 006. 004 is this area up here. So I'm highlighting, we've got 06. So you can see this is the 8 acres right here. Here is the 1.292 acres here. Here is our proposed roadway right here. Okay, this is the old roadway, and there's the proposed one. You don't have the edges of pavement. We do have on the existing, but we do have the proposed edges of pavement right here. So this is the corridor. So this is parcel 8. This is the 004, 1.9, excuse me. And then the total of the 9.820 acres, all of that combined. Now, what you're doing if you're an acquisition agent, I know many of you on here are, you're either going to, in the old days, we used to take the plan sheets and we would take scissors and we would cut them on the match lines. That's kind of what I'm going to do here. And you can actually, in today's day and age, you can still do it that way, and it's still very efficient and works very well. But if you have a program called Bluebeam, or if you have Adobe Professional, you can actually cut and paste these. It's not perfect. That's what I've done for this slide presentation. So I've kind of show you, this is sheet 7 and this is sheet 8, right-of-way plan sheet 7 and 8. So what we technically do is we cut these sheets and paste them together. Here is parcel 8. As you can see, it stretches across both of the sheets. So we'll zoom in here. I've cut out, just kind of highlighting where parcel 8 is on sheet 8 and where parcel 8 is on sheet 7. And I've pasted them together, highlighted the property. And you're probably asking yourself, why are you doing this? You will see. Well, it's going to make it a lot easier to understand the summary of additional right-of-way. Here is the ownership hook line. So this is auditor's permit parcel number, that's 004, and over here is 006. This is the larger tract of land. This is the smaller tract of land. So looking at the summary sheet, again, the column or record area, this area right here is the 8.5, and this area over here is the 1.292 acres. The first column we have after the record area is what's called the total PRO, present road occupied. What part of the present road occupies the current property owner? So what that really means in the big picture is we own, prior to this project, we own this in an easement, a standard highway easement. That's what identifies or gives us PRO. If we own this corridor in fee, there would be 0 PRO. It's only when we own it in easement. In other words, the property line goes to the center of the old roadway. As part of this project, we're going to acquire this as a fee-taking WD. So we're going to acquire all this PRO as well as acquire some additional right-of-way. So we identify what is the total PRO. So for parcel that ends with the parcel auditor's permit parcel number that ends with 006, we're going to acquire 0.1074 acres. And for the auditor's permanent parcel number that ends in 004, we're going to acquire 0.1719 acres. So we're acquiring more PRO from the smaller tract of land, okay? Next, we have what I'm going to skip over to the net take column. That is the area that we're going to acquire in addition to the PRO. So this would be the area that we didn't own any rights to before the project, but what we're going to acquire and own after. That's what's called the net take area. So that's this area I've highlighted in a little bit darker green. And as you can see from the 006, we're going to acquire 0.0235 acres, which happens to be this little chunk of land right here. And then we're going to acquire this big chunk of land, which is 0.2384 acres for a combined 0.2619 acres. All right. After the total PRO, what is the gross take? What's the total area that we're going to acquire? Well, we're going to acquire the PRO because we're acquiring a WD, a fee taking, and we're going to acquire this net take area that we identified. So the gross take ends up being everything that we're acquiring in fee or WD. So the total acreage is 0.5412 acres. What is the PRO intake? So this is the present road occupied that we are going to acquire. It just so happens on this project that we're going to acquire all of it. As you notice, the numbers match. We have a 0.1074 and a 0.1719 acres. It's the same as the total PRO, but in a lot of our projects, it's not. We may be only acquiring a portion of, so these numbers don't always match up because we're not acquiring all of the PRO per se, but in this case we are. So the total PRO and the PRO intake are the same. Lastly is the net residue. Now the left and the right means which side of the center line. And always, I think I mentioned this on Tuesday, but if I didn't, I'm going to mention it now. Right and left is designated as always standing on the center line looking in increasing station. What's the higher station looking ahead? That's our right side. Then we identify the right and the left. Obviously, if the center line is right here and we're looking in increasing station, this is the right side. The net residue is 9.2788 acres. So that's everything highlighted in red. That's what the property owner will retain after the project is completed. They will lose all rights to this area right here. ODOT will own it all in fee. Okay. As you can see, we've reduced their total acreage from 9.8220 acres to 9.2788 acres. So roughly just over a half acre they're going to lose. Now, the next two parcels that we acquire are the Channel Easement, which I've highlighted here. It's a very small area right there in yellow, Channel, and that's all from that 006 auditor's permanent parcel number. It's a very small portion. There's no PRO and there's no PRO intake. Next is the temporary, and you probably didn't even see it happen so fast, but there's a really small temporary easement right there. It's highlighted in blue, 8T, and it's 0.0022 acres. So it's a very small chunk of land that we needed to acquire to build the project. And we'll talk about that in a little bit when we get into the right-of-way detail sheet. So,
Hey, Brent, there's a question real quick that came in. What is the 8-PR on the summary sheet? They wanted to know what that was.
8-
If
oh,
you go back.
great question. Yeah, property right. Oh, I'm not going to get into that today, but I will say that it is a property. There's no physical acquisition. It's a right that the property owner had. And really on this plan, if you look closely, there's a driveway easement that goes across 3 different properties. In order to access parcel 8, they have to go over 2 parcels to get back here. Well, parcel owner 8 has an easement with these guys, and we had to acquire a property right because there's a right they had it. We were eliminating it. That's what PR is, property right. Great question though. And thank you for asking, because I actually meant to cover that and I totally forgot. So with that being said, moving on here to what I want to do is I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about how the math works out. So now that you kind of understand or have a understanding of what each column is and how it relates to the right-of-way plan sheets, I want to show you that there is a mathematical formula to this as well and how it works. So net residue, which is over here, and I picked a different parcel. I don't want to use the same one. I want you guys use your thinking caps here. We went with 14 WD. The net residue is 2.5717 acres. So that is what we're trying to come to. The mathematical formula, basically you take the record area, which is the total area they own, you subtract out the total PRO and the net take. So the part that they already have in PRO, and then the new area that we're going to acquire, that gives us the net residue. So that is all subtracted from the record area. But how do you get to the net residue, you might ask? This is how. So there's the net residue. How do you get to the net take? You take the gross take, subtract the PRO intake, and that equals the net take. You want to take a snapshot of that. You should have this stuff in PDF, but ultimately that's how we come up with these numbers. And if you understand the slides I went over before, and that's why I showed the graphics, when you understand how to interpolate all of these different columns and the types of takes they're requiring, the formulas get pretty easy. So if you're struggling with looking at the formulas, go back and make sure you understand how PRO and PRO intake work. Now, moving on to some other columns on the summary sheet. After the net residue and the net take, we have what's called the structure column. Essentially what that means is Is there a structure in the take area or near the take area? And the S means, is there any privately owned signs in the take area? So if there's a structure that's going to be involved, there's a yes in the column. If there is a privately owned sign, and the number 3 represents this situation where they had 3 privately owned signs that happen to fall inside of the take area. Okay, they're not encroachments. We'll go over that in a little bit. They're signs that are in the take area that we're going to have to compensate the property owner for. The next column over is a type of fund column. This fund column is actually going to go away. Years ago, we used to identify, and we still do, what money is being used to acquire the right-of-way. It's not necessary because all this is tracked through a system that we utilize. So we're going to eliminate that eventually, so don't get too concerned about it, but I wanted to point it out what it is. The next column is used to be called the remarks and the personality column. It is now just called the remarks column. Years ago, I don't know why, before I ever got involved, the designer was supposed to identify personality items, which if you really understand acquisition and the appraisal process, personality items, the designer does not have the expertise to identify personality items. So it really is just a remarks column for the designer to identify any unique things going on that they can't graphically portray in the plans, or that might help explain the graphics that are shown. So in this case, quickly, there's the parcel related to this one. There's 12 trees and 2 shrubs that are going to be removed, most likely. And then there's an encroachment, okay? A privately owned sign to be removed. The little asterisk denotes, and it's on the plans too, I'll show you one a little bit later on the detail sheets. This little asterisk denotes that there's an encroachment, meaning the sign is in our existing right-of-way and is not permitted to be there. And when that happens, we are not liable to compensate the property owner because the sign is illegally there. So we just need to denote it. It gets handled through the acquisition, the appraisal process, but as a designer, we have to identify anything that's encroaching our right-of-way. Some other things that get shown in the remarks column: if you happen to have a parcel that doesn't have a take, we numbered it, but we're not acquiring anything, the designer will put in there no take. Again, we already went over trees, and you got to look closely. Sometimes this is removal of trees, and other times it's proposed trees. And in this project, I think a lot of these are actually proposed because of the landscape plan. 3T, anytime we have a temporary easement, there will be a brief description in the remarks column what the temporary is for. Usually, in this case, it's for proposed mounding, but a lot of times it's just for grading and drive aprons is usually what temporary easements are for. All right. All right. And then we have a few notes throughout that I'm going to go over the summary sheet, and up here is the formula. I don't go over that because we've already covered it, but the formulas are up here too. So I've highlighted in red. This is a note that we put on all the summary sheets. All the temporary parcels to be acquired for this project are for 12 months. And that timeline is determined by the length of the construction of the project. So we'd have to know the length of the construction. So it's going to take the contractor 12 months to build the project, or a maximum of 12 months. So the temporary easements are for a length of 12 months. The next thing that we have is the revision block that I'm going to cover in the lower right-hand corner. And in the revision block, we have that date, that completion date right here that I talked about on the legend sheet. And why that's important is because anything that is revised on any plan sheet after this date gets included in this revision block above here. So you can see the dates here are after the 12/6. And then also ownership verification. The designer is required to verify the ownerships on the plans. And as you can see, that was done about a month before the plans were completed. So when you do a title report, there's a possibility that the ownerships may have changed. If they changed after this date, then it's a revision that we require the designer to do that we would compensate them for. If if the ownership changed before this date, that's a mistake on their part. So it's just some dates to be aware of is really what that boils down to. This note down here just says, it's next to the temporary easement note. It says under no circumstances are temporary easements to be used for storage of material or equipment by the contractor, unless noted otherwise. We do have some temporaries. It's rare, but we do acquire some temporaries on occasion that will store temporary easement. But in general, that is not what we acquire temporary easements for. The contractor is supposed to acquire their own rights to store equipment with whatever property owner they deem appropriate. That's not generally what we acquire temporary easements for. In the top of the summary sheet, there's two different things you need to be aware of. There's just a quick summary, total of ownerships that we're impacting, total number of parcels or types of right-of-way we're acquiring, if there's any total takes or any ownerships with structures involved. And then the next one here is what we call the grantee note. All right-of-way acquired in the name of the state of Ohio. On occasion, we do acquire some right-of-way in the name of a local LPA. If it's a local job, this grantee note would say all right-of-way acquired in the name of Franklin County or the city of Columbus. And then if there was a couple parcels that we acquired in somebody else's name, they get what's called a V designation. Again, that's for another time to cover, but that's the grantee note. So that concludes the summary sheet. I know it was a lot of information. Victoria, I'll turn it over to you for the knowledge check.
Okay, I'm launching the first question.
All right.
So that you can go ahead and answer it. If you can't get the answer to take on your screen, it's because you're in full screen mode. Hit escape, and then it'll let you choose true or false. PRO is the acronym for present road occupied. Is that true or false? And then while they're answering that, Brett, we had a question about if you see SH by parcel owner, what does that mean?
SH by parcel owner.
And maybe that's something you want to come back to.
Well, standard SH means standard highway easement. So I don't know if that answers her question, but that's what SH stands for. But by, she said, he or she said by
the parcel owner.
Yeah, hopefully that answers it. I need more information.
If not, I mean, you'll know who it is, so you can follow up with them. We had 78% choose true and 22% choose false. So I'm going to hide the results and you can let them know what it really was.
All right. So PRO is the acronym for present road occupied. True.
Great. I'm going to launch the next one. Temporary easements are to last 12 months on this project. True or false? And they're answering on that one. And then someone else wanted to know what gross and net take meant again, if you don't mind.
Sure. Gross take is the total area we're acquiring. So that could include PRO. Now, if we're acquiring, and the one example I showed, we're acquiring a fee acquisition. So, and we did have PRO, we had standard highway easement before. So the gross take would include the PRO and the net take. And what was the second part of the question? Make sure I answer it correctly.
You know what? I've already moved it off my screen. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. That's okay. I think what was the net residue? I believe.
Yeah.
Net residue is the area that the property owner will retain after the project, free and clear of any standard highway easement. Okay. So that's really what that means.
All right. 76% chose true, 24% chose false. I'll hide the results and you can let them know what the answer was.
Right. So temporary easement, 12 months. Answer is true. Is at the bottom, that one little note I said, all temporary easements acquired for 12 months on this project. So, all righty. Very good.
We've got about 15 minutes left in the hour, just so you know.
All right. Very good. We're going to go quick, guys. Put on your thinking caps even more because we're going to buzz through this. All right. So what I really want to dive into is now the right-of-way detail sheets, tie this all kind of together relative to what we do on the right-of-way. I'm not going to cover everything. We talked about all the different proposed items and things of that nature. I really want to focus on the right-of-way part of this. So again, just quickly, same thing. The part here I want to cover is on our right-of-way detail sheets. We will identify the station range that the sheet covers. So this project starts, or this plan sheet starts at 148 and it goes to station 109 or 1099 plus 00. And that's in the title block along the right-hand side. Next, I want to cover the station limit flags. We covered this on Tuesday, but in right-of-way, we actually show all the flags on the right-of-way detail sheet. Oops, sorry, back up. I went too fast. So we have the begin work, the begin acquisition, and the begin project. Know this. Begin work is all the incidental. Basically, any of the grading that the project has, or the contractor has to do to make the new roadway match the existing roadway. Begin acquisition is literally where the acquisition will begin for the project corridor. And then begin project is where the full depth pavement repair starts, is generally where that the begin project is. Again, first thing you must do, even in the right-of-way sheets, is you must identify where the proposed center line is. Proposed center line right-of-way in construction. That is the most important thing to do because everything is built from that. All of our right-of-way is acquired from the proposed right-of-way. So identify the proposed right-of-way. It certainly doesn't hurt to identify the proposed edges of pavement, and it wouldn't hurt if it's a realignment to identify this dashed red line is the old right-of-way, center line of right-of-way. So identify that in the old alignment. I encourage you to do that. Everything will eventually make more sense if you understand where the existing and the proposed are at. Then what I would do is I would start identifying all the different property owners and the boundaries of their property. So what I've done here is I've highlighted parcel number 5. I'm not going to do all of them. I picked out 3 on this sheet. So I've highlighted parcel owner number 5, owner 3B in blue. So basically it follows the right-of-way lines or their property lines and right-of-way lines all the way around. And then this is property owner 3. And we're going to zoom into 3. We're going to take a closer look here. So property owner 3, we have next to it, there's 3B. I've highlighted that. So this is parcel 3 over here, 3B, I should say. Here is parcel 3. And I've highlighted it in yellow. This is parcel 1WD down here. Now this is only relative to what I'm looking at right now, but I want you to understand we're going to dig in a little bit deeper. Just bear with me. This I've highlighted in red is the construction limits. Now what you want to understand, the construction limits is what determines or what identifies how much right-of-way we need to acquire. The construction limits tells the contractor, hey, you have to do all your work inside of this line. And it's an imaginary line. It's not a line that they draw out in the field or anything like that, but it is a line that we use, and we must have either permanent or temporary right-of-way that goes outside of that construction limit line. So the right-of-way should always be outside, whether it's existing or proposed, outside of this construction limit line. So with that being said, here is a 3WD. So this is highlighted in orange. You can see the construction limits and anything we're acquiring, and then temporary. We don't need this area permanently. We only need it to build this mounding. So that's why, as part of the design, we recognize that we only need this for a temporary period of time. So we're acquiring a temporary easement. As you can see, the proposed right-of-way lines go outside of the construction limits. Okay. So with that, this slide, guys, you don't have. I added it this morning because I realized I was going to talk a little bit about how to go around a parcel, but I never really truly explained bearings. This is a very, very quick explanation. It's a graphic. So really a bearing that you see along a line is separated into 2 things, the direction and an angular measurement. That's what surveyors use to describe parcels or center lines. The direction is broken down into 4 parts: due north, due east, due south, due west. There's 4 quadrants. Due north is 0 degrees, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. We'll just stick with the degrees. And then from due north, you go clockwise direction to due east. Due east is 90 degrees. Okay, so there's 90 degrees between north and the east. And then when you come around to south, you go from 90 back to 0. This whole quadrant up here is northeast. This down here is southeast, southwest. You go from south to west, you go from 0 degrees to 90 degrees west, and then back to 0 at the north. Now, if I were standing at point A and I needed to get to point B going in this direction, I'd be going northeast. If you look over here at the degrees, half of 90 is 45, and roughly that's 90, so half of 90. So I would be going northeast 45 degrees, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. If I got to point B and then I needed to go back to A, so this orange line here, going in this direction, now I'm going southeast, but I'm still going at an angle of 45 degrees because half of southwest is 45 degrees. So it's really about the direction, okay? So that being said, I know it's quick. We're going to zoom in here real quickly, and we're going to look at a parcel. So when we don't have room to include the bearings and the distance along a proposed right-of-way line, we'll use a balloon reference and a table. So this is 3WD that we're going to be describing. So we're going to be describing around this parcel right here. This is balloon reference A, so it's this line. This line represents north 10 degrees, 43 minutes, 19 seconds east, and it's 25.63 feet. Next is B, so from this point to this point is northeast, and it's 29.46, a distance of 22.04 feet. Here's C, and then here we had room to include the bearing and the distance along the proposed right-of-way line. Ultimately, we'd keep going around until we got back to the point of beginning. But that is describing the bearing and the distance along the proposed right-of-way line for parcel 3D. Now, real quickly, I want to cover, we also, every time there's a break in the right-of-way, the angle, change in direction, we have what's called a station and offset. So this is, this point, if we went perpendicular from the center line, is, when I mean perpendicular, I mean 90 degrees. So going 90 degrees from the center line, the station is 1098 plus 76. The offset, so this point right here is 78 feet left of the proposed center line. This point right here is at this station, so you can see we've moved ahead a few feet, roughly about 24 feet along the center line, but the offset distance is the same. And the reason it's the same is the center line is on a curve. Even though it looks like this point is further out, you have to remember we're in a curved section. And then this next point right here is at the same station, but the offset is 62 feet left. Okay, that's how our parcels are described on the plans, but it also translates to the legal description, which I would cover in another class at a later date. Also, we show on our right-of-way detail sheets the utilities. We show below ground. So this is a water line, and this is a fire hydrant symbol right here. We also show the above ground utilities. Here's a telephone pole or power pole. Actually, power pole, that's what P means. And then we also show any utility easements. So this area highlighted in yellow is where the utility easements are. And it's part of the subdivisions on both sides of the road. So these are the only two utilities out there in this corridor. And again, we'll show above ground and below ground utilities. So I've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to get into just real quickly closer look at some other things on a parcel, helping you guys identify. This is a very congested area. So the first thing you want to do, again, find the proposed center line. Then find the stationing. So this is the station range along the center line. This is station 1112 plus 00, station 1113, so there's 100 feet. So these are the station ranges. This is the center line. Here's the edge of the proposed pavement. Here's the old center line, and this is the old roadway. That's why parcel number 12 or property owner number 12, the property line goes to the old center line. Again, they own in standard highway easement. As you can see, the road is moving closer to their property. This is the proposed right-of-way. The old right-of-way is clear over here. This is existing standard highway easement. And proposed right-of-way is here. This is the parcel 12WD. We have a temporary easement right here. So this is the temporary right of way in the dashed, and this represents parcel 12T. So 12WD and 12T. So the point of this slide is to breaking down how you want to identify where the center line is, where the proposed right of way is, where the temporary right of way is, and where the property lines are, and then you can better identify where these parcels are at. Next, we'll rush through this. I'm going to zoom in here. This is on parcel 11. We looked at it on the property map. There's the proposed right-of-ways in red, the existing standard highway easement. Here's the temporary easement. That yellow is the construction limits. So there's the WD take. It's highlighted in gray. The blue is the temporary easement, and it's all within, all the proposed right-of-way is within the construction limits. And there would be bearings and distances along these. However, this is what we call a topo sheet. There's so much information on this sheet and the one I just showed you, parcel 12, that we separate out the survey information. So we have a topo sheet that has all the topography, the driveways, the trees, and then we have what's called a boundary sheet that has just the survey information on it and the property lines and the right-of-way lines. I'm not going to show that today for lack of time. I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit closer to the same area that we were just looking at, and I'll help you highlight. This is parcel 11WD. Here's 11T again, and then there's the construction limits. But what I want to show here is once you zoom in closer, you'll see there's a private sign to be removed by others. That sign is actually encroaching. Okay, because you can see the bottom of the sign is inside our right of way. They didn't denote it that way, but it should have been. That was one mistake that I saw on this plan. The next mistake is right after that. You have a 30-inch locust tree. Here's the tree. This big X identifies that we're going to remove the tree, but here's a note that says do not remove the tree. So plan designers make mistakes, and these are things we have to verify. We have to get back with the real estate administrator. We need to verify, is this sign truly an encroachment, or was the symbol placed in the wrong spot? Is it outside the right of way? This tree, the key here is do the construction plans have it as an X through it? If the construction plans have it with an X, then get rid of this. You're removing the tree, and that's what you need to tell the property owner. The worst thing you could ever do is tell the property owner that you're saving their tree and it's marked in the construction plans with an X, and they get home from work one day and the tree's gone because the contractor took it out and you as the agent told them that it was going to be saved. So make sure you verify those things. And then the last thing I want to talk about is an existing 3-rail wood fence to be removed. Here's the fence. I've highlighted it in red. There is a portion that is approximately 25 feet of the fence is encroaching, and then there's a portion that's in the take. So part of that fence is encroaching. We won't compensate them for that, but this small portion over here, we would. It's in the take area. Okay. So you got to look closely at these plans. This is what the right-of-way plans are for. It's a very high, very quick overview of how our right-of-way detail sheets work. I hope you find this helpful. I'm going to move on to Victoria and the knowledge check and see how she wants to handle this.
Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and launch the first question. We can do them real quick. The first thing you should look for on the right-of-way detail sheet is the stationing. True or false? And they're voting quickly. That's good.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to close the voting down because we've got the majority of responses in. And I'm going to share the results. 55% said true and 45% said false. So I'll be curious.
This is good. I knew this was going to trip a lot of people up. The first thing you should look for on a right-of-way detail sheet is the stationing, true or false. To be honest with you guys, this is kind of an opinion. I've said from the beginning, the first thing you look for is the center line. So it's false, in my humble opinion. Not that you're incorrect for looking for the stationing. Either way, you need to look for stationing and or center line. Those are two very important parts that you must look for first. So while technically you were wrong, my perspective, it's not necessarily wrong.
Well, I went ahead and launched the next question while you were answering
Yep.
that for them. So the construction limits help the right-of-way designer determine the type of right-of-way needed, true or false? And they're voting quickly on this one too. So, all right, I'm going to close this down on the voting and share the results. We had 80% that said true, 20% that said false, so I'll hide that. And
All right. The trick, this is the only trick question. You could count the first one as a trick question, number 3, but this is the only trick question. The construction limits help the right-of-way designer determine the right-of-way needs, not the type of right-of-way. That's all the construction limits do. We as a designer have to look closer at the construction plans to determine what type of work is going to be done in order to determine the type of right-of-way we need. The construction limits alone doesn't necessarily determine the type of right-of-way. It just tells us what we actually need to acquire. So,
is there anything else you have, Brett?
nope, I got nothing else.
All right, well, we're right up at 10, well, it's 10:01 now, but
Yep.
hopefully they'll forgive us. Everybody have a great rest of your day. We hope you've enjoyed this series, and you'll be getting a follow-up email with links to the recordings and the handouts. Thanks so much, Brett, for doing this. Greatly
Yep. Thanks,
appreciate it.
everybody. Thank you,
Have a
Victoria.
good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye.